It began with a mechanic, a quiet morning, and a girl kneeling in the dirt drawing a strange symbol no one had seen in decades. He didn't know her name. She didn't say a word. But what she drew would unravel a truth this small town had buried for nearly 40 years. If you believe some stories find you not the other way around, this one might stay with you long after it ends. Before we begin, if you're drawn to heartfelt, mysterious, and inspiring stories like this one, consider subscribing to the channel. Every story here is crafted with care, and we'd love to have you with us. Poor Mechanic found a girl drawing in the dirt. The mark was from a missing child case in 1986. The sun had barely risen over the ridge when Jake Bennett unlocked the front doors of his garage. The spring chill still clung to the morning air, and a fine mist hovered just above the gravel lot like the ghost of last night's fog. He slung his thermos onto the workbench and reached for his tools, eager to finish Mrs. Larkin's alternator before lunch. That's when he saw her. A small figure crouched in the dirt just beyond the parking area, half concealed behind the rusted fender of an old Ford. She wasn't moving, just drawing. Jake squinted, stepped out from under the awning, and walked slowly toward her boots, crunching on gravel. She didn't flinch. She looked to be around 10, maybe 11, skinny barefoot. A faded blue hoodie hung from her shoulders, and her jeans were caked in mud like she'd been crawling. She held a twig in one hand, dragging it deliberately through the earth in a looping pattern. Jake cleared his throat. "Hey there, you okay?" No answer. She kept drawing slow, deliberate arcs, intersecting with sharp angles. The pattern was oddly symmetrical, almost like a spiral inside a sunburst. Jake crouched a few feet away. "Are you hurt?" Still nothing. Closer now, he could see her face, pale, freckled, hollow-eyed. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. "Where's your family?" he asked, trying to keep his voice soft. "Are you lost?" She paused, then looked up at him for the first time. Her eyes were a stormy gray, too old for her face. She whispered one word: cold. Jake shrugged off his flannel shirt and draped it over her shoulders. "I'll call someone to help, all right," he said. "We'll get you warm. Maybe some pancakes." But as he reached for his phone, she grabbed his wrist. "Don't call them." Jake blinked. "Who?" She pointed to the symbol in the dirt. "They don't like when I draw it." Before he could ask what that meant, the rumble of tires on gravel broke the silence. Deputy Ray Holloway's cruiser rolled to a stop just beyond the garage. Jake had called him earlier to check in on a lost dog near the old sawmill. Ray stepped out and adjusted his belt. "Morning, Jake." "You find that golden retrieve?" He stopped mid-sentence as he saw the girl. She looked at Ray, then down at her drawing. And then, without warning, she stood and bolted. "Whoa!" Jake shouted, lunging instinctively to block her path. "It's all right." She skidded to a stop, breathing hard, eyes wide. Ray stepped closer, hands raised. "We're not here to hurt you, sweetheart." But the girl was already backing away. Jake turned to Ray. "Something's not right. She won't say her name. She doesn't want the police." Ray frowned, kneeling beside the pattern in the dirt. His face changed, first confusion, then recognition, then something Jake couldn't place. Fear. Jake asked, "You've seen that before?" Ray didn't answer. He pulled out his phone and snapped a picture. Jake narrowed his eyes. Ray. Ray stood, just being thorough, but he wasn't thorough. He was shaken. "I'm taking her inside," Jake said, guiding the girl gently by the shoulder. "She needs food. Warmth. Maybe someone she can actually trust. She needs to go through proper channels," Ray insisted. "We'll call child services." "No," Jake said, firmer now. "Not until we know more." Ray hesitated, jaw tightening. Then he nodded. "Fine, I'll file the encounter. But Jake, be careful. That symbol. It was part of a case. Long time ago. I thought it was buried." Jake stopped in his tracks. What kind of case? Ray's eyes met his flat and hard. A missing girl. 1986. Name was Anna Marsh. 8 years old. Gone without a trace. That drawing was found on her bedroom wall the night she disappeared. Jake's stomach turned. She's been gone for almost 40 years, Ray added, and that symbol hasn't shown up since. Inside the garage office, Jake wrapped the girl in a blanket and handed her a mug of hot cocoa. She held it carefully but didn't drink. Jake sat across from her. "Do you know who Anna Marsh is?" She didn't respond. "Where are your parents?" Silence. Jake glanced down at the sketch pad he'd slid in front of her. After a pause, she began to draw again the same looping mark, this time even more detailed. "She's coming back," the girl whispered. "She's not finished." Jake swallowed. "Who's coming back?" The girl looked up, her eyes wet but unblinking. "The one who never left." Outside, the wind picked up. Jake glanced through the office window. Ray was already gone. Only the dust from his tires lingered in the air. He looked back at the girl. Whoever she was, whatever had brought her here, it was no accident. Something old had resurfaced, and Jake had the sinking feeling that he wasn't just sheltering a lost child. He was opening the first page of a story someone had buried a long time ago and had hoped would never be read again. The town of Willow Ridge hadn't changed much since 1986. The hardware store still had a hand-painted sign out front. The diner still served coffee thick as tar in chipped mugs. And the sheriff's station, though freshly painted, still smelled faintly of old paper and older silence. Jake hadn't planned on returning there, not since the fire that took his wife 10 years earlier. But now he sat in the front lobby, coat still damp from the morning mist, eyes fixed on the girl beside him. She was curled up in one of the vinyl chair's blankets, still clutched tight around her shoulders. The sketch pad rested on her lap. She hadn't drawn since they left the garage, but Jake could see her fingers twitching like they were remembering the lines before she even put pen to paper. Deputy Holloway hadn't returned any of his calls, so Jake had driven straight to the source, the records department. Behind the glass window at the front desk sat a woman with dark-rimmed glasses and a face Jake hadn't seen in years. "Elena," he said. The woman looked up slowly. Her eyes widened with surprise, then narrowed in recognition. "Jake Bennett in the flesh," he said. "Didn't know you still worked here." "Didn't know you still fixed cars," she replied, standing. "What brings you in?" Jake hesitated. Then he nodded toward the girl. "She showed up at my garage this morning. Drew something I think you need to see." Elena stepped around the desk, her heels clicking against the tile. When she saw the girl, her expression softened. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl didn't answer. Instead, she opened the sketch pad and turned it around. Elena looked down. Her breath caught. The room seemed to still. Jake watched the color drain from her face as her eyes locked on the image. It was the same mark, identical to the one carved into her little sister's wall on the night Anna disappeared. The same spiraling sunburst drawn in crayon and smeared by tiny hands hours before the house was torn apart by search teams and quieted by grief. Elena didn't speak for a long moment. When she did, her voice cracked. "Where did she learn this?" Jake shook his head. "That's the thing. She won't say. She barely talks. But she keeps drawing it." Elena crouched down to the girl's level. "Do you know Anna Marsh?" The girl's eyes lifted. Her lips parted. She kept drawing it. The girl said, her voice small. She didn't want to forget. Elena blinked, stunned. Her hands trembled. Jake leaned in. "You know something about this, don't you?" Elena rose to her feet. "Come with me." The archives were kept in the back, past the sheriff's office, down a hallway that smelled of damp carpet and forgotten time. Elena unlocked the steel door and flicked on the overhead light. Row after row of labeled boxes lined the narrow space. She reached for one Marsh Anna, 1986, unresolved. Jake stood beside her as she opened the lid. Inside were photographs, typed statements, field notes, all yellowed, all worn by years of fingers flipping through without ever finding the answer they sought. Elena pulled out a folder marked Bedroom Wall Evidence. She handed it to Jake. He opened it and stared at the photograph inside. The symbol, the same one the girl had drawn. Only this one was rougher, scribbled in desperation with crayon on faded wallpaper. She was 8, Elena whispered. She used to draw that mark everywhere. Said it helped her sleep. Said it meant safe place. We thought it was just a kid thing. Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. The girl behind them spoke again. It wasn't safe. They turned to look at her. She'd followed them into the room unnoticed. Now she stood in the doorway, eyes wide, arms hanging limp at her sides. She was scared, the girl said. She hid it in the wall. Elena stepped forward. What did she hide? The girl's gaze dropped. I don't know yet. Later that afternoon, Jake sat in Elena's office nursing a cup of bitter coffee. So, what happens now? He asked. Elena stared out the window, lost in thought. I've tried to forget that symbol for most of my life, she said. It haunted our family. They said Anna probably wandered off, fell in the quarry, but I always knew there was more. Something off, something no one wanted to dig up. Jake nodded slowly. And now this girl shows up, no name, no past, and starts drawing the same symbol your sister did before she vanished. Either she's part of something, or she's a message. Jake set the cup down. What do you mean? Elena turned to him, eyes glassy. I mean, maybe we weren't supposed to forget. Maybe someone or something is trying to tell us the story isn't over. Jake looked toward the door where the girl sat quietly just outside doodling again in her sketchpad. I think she remembers more than she's saying, he said. Elena nodded. Then we'd better start listening. That evening, back at Jake's home, the girl stood in front of the fireplace staring at a photo on the mantel. It was of Jake and his late wife smiling in the summer sun. She pointed. She's gone. Jake stepped beside her. Yeah, a long time ago. The girl looked up at him. Did it hurt? Jake paused. Still, Desi said quietly. She nodded and went back to her drawing. When he looked down, he saw that she wasn't drawing the symbol anymore. She was drawing a face. A young girl. Big eyes. Freckles. And behind her in the shadows, a second figure. Watching. Jake sat alone on the edge of his porch watching the dusk settle over the hills like a blanket pulled slowly across the earth. Inside, the girl, still unnamed, still mute more often than not, was curled on the couch beneath the old quilt his wife had sewn years ago. The sketchpad lay open on her lap, the pages filling rapidly now. Faces, figures, symbols. And always that same feeling as if she were trying to speak through ink because the words still lived too deep. He couldn't explain why he'd brought her home again. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the flicker in her eyes when she looked at him, not trust exactly, but something quieter. Familiarity. Like she saw something in him no one else had. He took a sip of coffee gone cold and rubbed a hand through his beard. Then headlights broke across the yard. A silver sedan pulled up near the fence. The door opened and Elena Marsh stepped out. She carried a folder beneath one arm, her face drawn but determined. Jake stood stepping off the porch. Didn't think you'd come all the way out here. Elena shut the car door. Didn't think I'd want to. They walked toward the porch together. Jake held the screen door open and Elena stepped into the dim warmth of the house. The girl looked up from her drawing. Elena froze. On the page was a new image, a wooden swing suspended from a bent oak tree. The details were simple but unmistakable. That's my parents' house, Elena whispered, Anna's favorite tree. We used to play there every summer. Jake frowned. You sure she's never seen it before? She can't have, Elena said, shaking her head. It's on private land. We moved away after Anna disappeared. No one's lived there in years. Elena stepped closer to the girl. Do you remember that place? The girl looked up, eyes wide. There was music, she said softly. And cookies. And... Someone watched from the barn. Elena's voice cracked. There was a barn. The girl nodded. It smelled like hay and oil. Jake and Elena exchanged a glance. Jake lowered his voice. You think she's describing your childhood home? Elena looked stunned. More than that. She's describing it like she was there. They drove out before dawn. Jake insisted on taking his truck, claiming the roads beyond the hills would swallow a sedan whole. Elena didn't argue. The girl sat between them, wrapped in the same old quilt, holding the sketchpad like a compass. She didn't speak the entire ride, only pointed once when the turnoff to the Marsh family land appeared through the fog. The old gate creaked on its hinges. The driveway was overgrown, but the foundation of the place still stood as small white farmhouse shutters askew, the paint long peeled. Elena stepped out first, her breath catching. Jake helped the girl down from the truck, keeping close as they walked toward the tree. There it was. The swing, though rotted, still hung. The oak still stood, though its branches were gnarled with age, and beneath it, as if drawn to a ghost, the girl knelt and touched the dirt. She sat here, the girl said. She liked the wind. Elena brought a trembling hand to her lips. She always did, even when it scared her. Jake crouched beside the girl. "Can you show us where the barn was?" She nodded and pointed across the field. The barn had collapsed partially, one side caved in, the roof buckled, but enough remained to make it recognizable. The hinges on the sliding door groaned in protest as Jake pushed it open. The air inside was thick with dust and memory. Old tools, bales of straw long turned to rot, a rusted red wheelbarrow. Elena stepped inside her boots, crunching over debris. "Anna and I used to play here when Mom and Dad were arguing inside." Jake moved to the far wall where a strip of wood looked newer than the rest. He ran his hand across it and felt the edge of something carved beneath the grain. He pulled out a flashlight and aimed it. There, barely visible, the same symbol, drawn with a child's hand. "Anna marked this wall," Jake murmured. The girl stepped forward. "This is where she hid it." Jake turned, hid what the girl knelt, and began tracing the edges of a loose floorboard. Jake joined her, prying it up carefully with the end of his flashlight. The wood gave way with a soft pop, revealing a hollow pocket below. Inside, wrapped in a faded purple ribbon, was a small notebook. Elena gasped. "That's Anna's diary." Back at the truck, Jake handed the girl a water bottle while Elena carefully unwrapped the diary. The pages were fragile, browned by time. On the inside cover, in looping childlike script, Anna Marsh, age 8. "If I go missing, look here." Elena's breath hitched. She knew. She flipped through, slowly reading aloud snippets. The man with the gray coat came again. "Mommy says, don't talk about him. He stood by my window. I didn't tell Daddy. He doesn't like the mark. I drew it under the swing. It keeps me safe." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. Jake swallowed hard. Who the hell was this man? The girl, still quiet, spoke barely above a whisper. "He had a silver key. He smelled like smoke." Elena looked at Jake, her voice trembling. There was one man who always showed up uninvited. Worked for the county, building inspector. He said he was checking the foundation. Jake nodded slowly. And maybe what he really checked was where the little girls hid. They fell silent. Only the wind moved now, curling around the truck, rustling the trees. The girl took Elena's hand for the first time without fear. "Can we go home now?" she asked. Elena looked at Jake. He looked at the girl. And without needing to say it aloud, they both knew they weren't going back. They were moving forward, and what lay ahead might hurt, might break them apart. But it was time. Time to uncover what really happened in 1986. The wind pressed through the pines as Jake's truck rumbled back into town headlights, carving pale paths through the fog. Elena sat in the passenger seat, the small diary from Anna Marsh clutched in her lap, unopened since they left the old barn. She hadn't said much in the past hour. Her eyes kept drifting to the girl in the back seat now, fast asleep beneath the quilt sketchpad still hugged to her chest like a secret too fragile to share. Jake gripped the wheel a little tighter as they approached the outskirts of Willow Ridge. "Elena," he said gently, "you don't have to read it now." She shook her head. "If I wait, I won't have the nerve." She opened the diary. The pages were brittle and soft with age, filled with looping letters and uneven margins, the kind of handwriting that only children have, earnest, full of things unsaid between the lines. and then a passage underlined 3 times in faint blue crayon. He told me not to say anything, but I drew it again. Behind the barn. Mommy says symbols can protect you. Maybe that's why he got so mad. He called it a lie. I don't think he likes the truth. Elena stared at it, lips parted. Her voice was barely audible. She tried to protect herself. Jake slowed the truck. Whoever he was, he knew she was scared. She drew it again, Elena murmured. Just like this girl. They both looked back at the child. Her eyes were closed now, but her fingers still traced invisible lines against the cover of her pad. She's carrying something Jake said. Memories that don't belong to her. Or maybe ones no one ever let her speak. By morning, the fog had lifted. Jake had offered Elena the guest room at his house, which had stood empty since his wife died. She declined, but asked to return the next day. There was more to uncover, she said. There always had been. Jake let the girl sleep in late. He brewed coffee, fed the chickens, and came back to find her awake sitting at the table sketching again. This time there was something new. A structure, a tall building, wrought iron gates, a tower with a weather vane shaped like a crescent moon. Jake tilted his head. What's this? The girl paused. It's the place he took her. Jake crouched beside her. Do you know where that is? She hesitated, then nodded. Can you show me? She reached into the back of her sketch pad and pulled out a crumpled highway map Jake had forgotten he kept in the glove compartment. She circled a spot in the northern woods, an area Jake recognized instantly. Old Ridgeline Asylum, he whispered. They shut it down in '89. The girl looked up. She was there. Jake sat back stunned. Elena didn't say anything about that place. She didn't know the girl said, but Anna did. 2 hours later, Jake stood on Elena's porch, the morning sun catching in the corners of his eyes. She opened the door before he could knock. You found something. He handed her the sketch pad. She drew the Ridgeline Asylum. Elena froze. That place was condemned years before Anna vanished. She says that's where Anna was taken. Elena's voice cracked. No one ever searched there. It wasn't even considered. She drew it from memory. Elena stared down at the sketch. Then we need to go. The road to the asylum was barely passable. Cracked pavement gave way to dirt, and the forest leaned in from both sides as if trying to reclaim what the world had tried to forget. The asylum rose from the trees like a broken tooth, tall gray, hunched under a sagging roof. Boards covered the windows. Vines strangled the brickwork. A rusted gate hung open on one hinge. Jake parked at the edge of the lot. You stay here with her, Elena said. Jake shook his head. We go in together. Inside, the air was stale, thick with mold and old paper. The reception area was still intact, chairs, upended filing cabinets long emptied. Elena's flashlight scanned the walls, flickering across old graffiti and stains that might have once been messages. They followed the girl's memory to the west wing. Most of it had collapsed, but one hallway remained intact, barely. At the end was a door with peeling green paint and a number, room 217. Jake pushed it open. The room was small. A bed frame, a toppled chair, a cracked mirror, and on the far wall, hidden beneath decades of dust and grime, was the symbol, etched with something sharp, a blade or a nail. It matched the girl's drawing exactly. Elena stepped forward and pressed her fingers to the lines. She was here. Jake crouched, noticing something glinting in the corner. He reached for it. A bracelet, child-sized. Purple beads faded, but still legible. A-N-N-A. Elena sank to her knees. I told them, she whispered. I told them she didn't run away. Jake placed a hand on her shoulder. You were right. She turned eyes wet. Why didn't they believe me? Jake's voice was low. Because people don't want to believe in monsters when they wear county uniforms. They returned home in silence. The girl didn't ask what they'd found. She didn't need to. That night, Elena sat beside her on the porch swing, the stars scattered like glass across the sky. The girl leaned her head on Elena's shoulder. "I saw her there," she whispered. She cried in the corner, but she never screamed. Elena closed her eyes. "Did she say anything?" "She said the mark didn't work," the girl replied. "She said it was too late." Elena pulled the girl close. "It's not too late now." Jake watched them from the kitchen window, and for the first time in a long time he felt something move inside him. Not grief, not fear, but the beginning of hope. The garage was quiet that afternoon, too quiet. Jake stood at his workbench, hands deep in the guts of an old Dodge transmission, but his mind wasn't on torque converters. His thoughts circled like the belt of the engine he wasn't fixing around the girl, around Elena, and around the purple-beaded bracelet that now lay on his kitchen counter, heavy with the weight of a name the town had tried to forget. Anna. He paused, staring out the garage window. Across the lot, the girl sat beneath the overhang, sketching again. This time, not symbols, not memories. People. Jake walked over and crouched beside her. "You drawing someone new today?" he asked softly. She nodded and held up the paper. There were two figures this time, a woman and a man standing beside a girl holding her hands. The figures were simple, almost childlike, but the resemblance was unmistakable. "It's us," Jake murmured. "You, me, and Elena." The girl said nothing, but her smile was small and real. He swallowed against the lump rising in his throat. "Do you want that?" "For real?" She didn't answer. She just drew a small heart between the three figures, and Jake had to look away. Elena arrived an hour later. Her eyes were tired, but her stride had purpose. "Jake," she said, taking him aside, "I've been digging through the Marsh family boxes in the town archives. I found something odd." He followed her into the office. She placed a file on the desk and opened it to a faded photograph. A man in a dark coat stood near the edge of the Marsh property line. The photo was grainy, taken at a distance, but the figure was tall with a narrow frame and a posture that suggested authority. Jake leaned in. "Who's that?" Elena tapped the corner. His name was George Langley, building inspector officially, but Mom always said he gave her the creeps. Jake frowned. "You think he was the one he had access? He showed up right before Anna started drawing the symbol, then disappeared just after she vanished. Nobody followed up." Jake's jaw tensed. "That was 37 years ago. I know she said, but I ran his name through the state record system. He resurfaced under a different identity, George Lane, in a county up north. Guess what he did there?" Jake stared at her. "Child welfare contractor," she finished. They drove up that evening. It was a 2-hour ride into the next county pine forests, thickening, then thinning, as the hills fell away into flatland and farmland. The town was called Maple Run, small and quiet. A different zip code, but the same uneasy silence. Jake kept his hands tight on the wheel. "You sure about this?" Elena sat beside him, hands clenched in her lap. "I have to be." They arrived at a modest clapboard house at the end of a cul-de-sac. There was a rusted mailbox, a cracked driveway, and a porch swing creaking in the wind. Jake parked across the street. Elena exhaled. "We're not here to confront, just to see." Jake nodded. "Let's go." They approached slowly, not wanting to startle. The house looked lived in, but quiet, curtains drawn. Just as they reached the steps, the door opened. A man stood there, late 60s, maybe early 70s. Tall, lean, thinning gray hair combed precisely. His eyes were pale and glassy. "Can I help you?" he asked. Jake recognized the voice before he recognized the face. It was the voice from the girl's nightmares, the one she mimicked when whispering about the man who didn't like the truth. Elena's breath caught. Jake stepped forward. "You, George Langley." The man's eyes narrowed. "Don't know what you're talking about. We're not here to accuse," Jake said. "We just want answers." The man paused. Something flickered behind his eyes. Fear, maybe, or something darker. "I'm afraid you've got the wrong person." Elena stepped closer. "Do you remember Anna Marsh?" The man froze. It was only for a second, but it was there. Recognition, then denial. "No idea who that is," he said curtly. "Please leave my property." Jake didn't move. "She remembered you. I'm calling the sheriff." "You should." Jake replied, voice calm. "We've already spoken to him." That was a lie, but a necessary one. The man's eyes flicked between them. Then, without another word, he shut the door. Elena turned to Jake. "He knows, I know," Jake said, "but that's not enough." Back in Willow Ridge, Jake dropped Elena off at her house. She hesitated before stepping out of the truck. "Do you think she's strong enough for this?" she asked. Jake looked ahead. "I think she already survived the worst of it. We're just catching up." Elena nodded, then said something that surprised even herself. "I think she was meant to find you." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You think there's a reason a lost girl landed in my garage?" Elena smiled faintly. "I think the universe has a way of putting broken things next to people who know how to fix them." Jake watched her disappear inside, then drove home. That night he sat on the back porch. The stars were out and the wind was soft. The girl came out silently barefoot, her hair tousled from sleep. She crawled up beside him and leaned her head on his arm. Jake glanced down. "Hey." She didn't answer, just sat quietly. After a moment she whispered, "Can people choose their families?" Jake took a deep breath. "I think sometimes he said they choose us." She nodded once. "I want to stay." Jake felt his throat tighten. Then, "Stay." She leaned her head back and looked at the sky. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Jake heard her hum. A soft tune. Off-key. Familiar in a way that made his heart hurt. He didn't know if it was Anna's song, or hers, or something that lived between them both. But he knew this much. Whatever they were starting, it was worth everything that came before. The next morning broke with a quiet haze. Willow Ridge looked peaceful in that early-hour sunlight glinting off dewy rooftops, the soft sound of birdsong drifting between rows of weather-worn porches and cracked sidewalks. But peace, Jake had long ago learned, didn't mean truth. And in Willow Ridge, truth had a way of hiding in plain sight. He and Elena sat across from each other at the Willow Ridge diner, each nursing a mug of burnt coffee, neither touching the plates of eggs going cold in front of them. "I talked to Sheriff O'Hara this morning," Elena said, stirring her cup absently. Jake raised an eyebrow. "And he remembered Langley. Said the guy used to poke around. The Marsh property said he was flagged for trespassing once, but no charges were ever filed. O'Hara was a rookie back then. He was told to drop it." Jake leaned back. So the man who may have abducted Anna was reported and ignored. Elena's voice darkened. Worse, they buried it. Like they buried her. Outside, a pickup rumbled by, followed by a kid on a bike with a milk crate zip-tied to the back. Life rolled on. Jake tapped his fingers against the table. "We can't prove he did anything. Not with just her memories." She remembered the room in the asylum, Elena said. She described the bracelet. And now this man reappears under a different name in a different town with the same patterns. Jake shook his head. "That's not evidence. That's intuition. We need more." Elena hesitated, then pulled something from her coat pocket. A folded piece of paper. Jake opened it. It was a list of names. Most were familiar former teachers, retired cops, neighbors long since moved away. People who were around when Anna vanished. "You're making a list of ghosts," Jake asked. "I'm making a list of people who stopped asking questions," she said. That afternoon, Jake took the girl who still hadn't offered a name on a drive to the outskirts of town. He didn't tell her where they were going. She didn't ask. She just sat in the passenger seat, her sketchpad open, a pencil tucked behind her ear. He pulled off onto a gravel path that wound up toward the ridge where a crumbling concrete building stood alone in the brush. The old community center, he explained. They shut it down in the 90s. Used to be where folks held town meetings, barbecues, that sort of thing. The girl stared at the building. Her fingers tensed around the pad. "You remember this place?" She nodded slowly. There was a red bike. Jake blinked. "A what?" A red bike, she said, left behind the shed. It had white streamers on the handles. One of them was torn. He led her around the side. His boots crunched over broken glass and old leaves. Behind the shed was a bike. Red, rust-coated. Streamers fluttering gently in the breeze, one torn clean down the middle. Jake knelt beside it. "That's been here 30 years," he said quietly. "No one's touched it." The girl crouched next to him. It was hers. Jake looked at her. Anna's. The girl didn't respond. She didn't have to. Later that day, Elena called. "There's someone you need to meet," she said. "I tracked down Anna's old teacher, Mrs. Royston. She retired after the case moved out near Bishop's Lake. I just spoke to her." Jake glanced toward the girl now sleeping on the couch, curled like a cat in the sunlight. "Did she remember Anna more than that?" Elena said. "She remembers a man who used to wait in the parking lot. Never came inside, just stood by the gate." Jake's grip on the phone tightened. "She said Anna called him Mr. Silver," Elena added, "because of the car he drove." Jake went still. The girl had said it too. Silver. The next morning, they made the trip to Bishop's Lake. Mrs. Royston lived in a cabin at the edge of the woods, windows lined with lace, a garden overflowing with tomatoes and lavender. She opened the door with a cautious smile. Her hair was white and pulled back in a braid, her eyes soft and sharp all at once. "Elena," she said, embracing her. "It's been too long." She welcomed them inside and brewed tea. The girl sat silently, tracing the edge of her mug with one finger. "I remember Anna," Mrs. Royston said, voice rich with memory. "Quiet, sweet. Loved to draw. Had a sadness in her. Even at 8 you could see it. Like she knew something she wasn't supposed to." Jake leaned forward. "Did she ever talk about being afraid?" Mrs. Royston hesitated. "She mentioned a man. Tall, thin, always watching. Said he stood by the flagpole at recess but never came close. I told the principal. He said it was probably a parent." Elena's voice trembled. "Do you remember what he looked like?" "I never saw his face," she admitted. "But Anna drew him once. Said it helped her sleep." She walked over to an old bookshelf and pulled out a file folder. Inside was a single crayon drawing. Jake stared. The figure was tall and thin. No face. A long, gray coat. And behind him, drawn in black and purple, was the same symbol the girl had drawn over and over. The second mark. That night, back in Willow Ridge, Jake sat on the porch steps, the girl beside him, legs swinging. Fireflies blinked in the yard like sparks of memory trying to land. He finally asked the question that had lived in his chest since the day she appeared. "What's your name?" She looked up at him. "I don't remember." Jake's heart ached. "Do you want one?" She hesitated. "Anna used to call me Lily." Jake smiled. "Lily," he repeated. "That's a good name." She leaned against him, her small hand slipping into his. And for a moment, just a moment, it didn't matter what she remembered. Only that she was here. Safe. For now. The sky had turned slate gray by the time Jake parked the truck beside the old barn. The scent of distant rain hung in the air, heavy with electricity and memory. Lily sat beside him in the cab, silent but alert, her fingers curled tightly around the handle of her sketchpad. Elena stepped out first, boots crunching over the gravel. She carried a flashlight in one hand and Anna's diary in the other. There was something in her eyes now, less grief, more resolve. Jake met her gaze. "You sure about this? I was born in that house," she said. "But I think the truth was buried behind the barn." The wind moaned softly as they crossed the field. The barn hadn't changed since their last visit, weather-beaten, half-collapsed, but still standing. Still waiting. Lily stopped at the threshold and pointed to the far corner. There. Jake led the way, flashlight beam cutting across the debris. Elena followed, trailing her fingers along the warped wooden slats. They reached the wall. At first glance, it looked like any other part of the old structure, rotted beams, moss-covered edges, but then Jake noticed something strange. A section of the wall didn't quite match the rest. The boards were cleaner, straighter, newer. He tapped it gently. Hollow. Jake crouched and pressed his hand along the seam. One of the boards shifted. Elena stepped closer, breath catching. Jake pulled. The panel came free with a soft groan, revealing a narrow hollow behind the wall. Dust swirled thick and choking as the beam of the flashlight pierced into the space and landed on something small. Cloth, bone, and beads. Elena's knees gave out. She fell to the dirt, trembling, unable to breathe. Inside the wall, curled in a fetal position, were the remains of a child. The bracelet on the left wrist still shimmered faintly. A-N-N-A. Jake lowered the light. Elena's hand reached out shaking to touch the edge of the panel. But she didn't move closer. She couldn't. Lily stood behind them now. Still. Watchful. She tried to hide, Lily whispered. Elena turned to her, tears streaming down her face. "You remember this?" Lily nodded. He chased her. She thought the wall would keep her safe. Jake swallowed hard, his voice thick. "How do you know all this?" Lily stepped forward, kneeling gently by the opening. "She told me." Elena knelt beside her, when Lily placed a hand on her chest. "Here. Every night." Jake looked at Elena, then back at Lily. "Are you saying—" "She speaks to you." Lily nodded. She didn't want to be forgotten. Elena closed her eyes, sobbing quietly. Her hand reached out and took Jake's, grounding her. "I spent 37 years believing I failed her," she whispered. Jake's voice was gentle. "You didn't fail her. The town did. The people who turned away. The man who hurt her. But I stopped looking," she said. "I was 12. And I stopped." "No." Jake said. "You survived. And now you brought her home. They called Sheriff O'Hara. They didn't give him details, only that they'd found something that couldn't wait. Within the hour, crime scene tape stretched across the barn like a warning to the past we remember now." Jake stood beside the sheriff as the team carefully removed the remains. Elena sat in the truck with Lily, arms wrapped around her tightly. "I don't understand how this could have been missed," O'Hara said, voice hollow. "We searched this barn." "Not well enough," Jake replied. "I was new back then," O'Hara admitted. "It was my first big case. Everyone said she ran off, that it wasn't worth pushing. I believed them." Jake looked at him. "But you don't now." "No," O'Hara said. "Now I believe a little girl tried to tell us everything. And no one listened." He turned to Jake. "Who is she? The girl with you?" Jake didn't hesitate. "Her name is Lily, and she's the one who helped us see what we refused to see." That evening, they lit candles. The living room was quiet, soft. Lily sat between Jake and Elena, the three of them forming a triangle of silence and warmth. Elena held the bracelet in her palm. It had been released to her after the sheriff's team concluded their initial report. She'd washed it carefully, and now it shone again like it had the day Anna wore it for her 8th birthday. "She was so proud of it," Elena said softly. Said it made her feel grown up. Jake touched the beads gently. "She made sure it was found. She made sure she was found," Elena corrected. "On her terms." Lily looked up. She said she's not scared anymore. Elena met her eyes. "Do you still hear her?" "Only when I sleep." Jake exhaled, staring at the flickering candles. "I think she came to you for a reason," he said to Lily. "Maybe to finish her story. Maybe to give you yours." Lily turned the sketch pad around. A new picture. 3 people. Jake, Elena, Lily. But this time there was a 4th figure in the distance, small, glowing, smiling. Watching. Not forgotten. Outside, the sky turned a deep velvet blue. Jake stepped out onto the porch. Elena joined him after a while, her hand brushing against his. "You know," she said quietly, "I never thought I'd find her again." Jake glanced sideways. "I never thought I'd feel whole again." They stood together for a long time, the night wrapping around them like a second skin. Behind them, in the warm house, Lily slept peacefully for the first time since she arrived. And on the kitchen table, the bracelet rested beneath a hand-drawn name. Anna Marsh, 1978, 1986, never again forgotten. Elena hadn't returned to the Marsh family house in over 30 years. Even now, walking up the cracked path, it felt like crossing into another life, someone else's memories, someone else's grief. The grass had grown wild along the porch steps. The shutters hung crooked. A single wind chime twisted from a rusted hook creaking softly in the breeze. Jake held the front door open, but Elena hesitated. Inside was everything she had tried to leave behind. She stepped over the threshold like she was stepping into a dream. The smell hit her first dust-old wood, the faintest trace of lavender from the drawer sachets her mother used to make. She reached out, touching the banister where Anna had once slid down in her socks, giggling like the world was hers. She was here, she whispered. Jake nodded, quiet, behind her. They walked through the narrow hallway, past the faded family photos, past the door that led to the kitchen where her parents used to argue in voices too low for children to hear, but too sharp to forget. And then they reached the bedroom. Anna's bedroom. The door creaked open with a groan, like the house exhaling. Everything was just as it had been left, the faded wallpaper of crescent moons and stars, the small twin bed, the toy chest painted with chipper bunnies. Elena's breath caught as her eyes landed on the corner wall. The mark had once been there, scrawled in crayon, scrubbed off by someone desperate to erase its meaning. She stepped inside, shoes quiet on the worn floorboards. Jake stayed back, letting her move at her own pace. On the dresser, a jewelry box sat unopened. Elena turned the tiny brass key. The lid creaked and the ballerina inside spun once, then stopped. She lifted the tiny figure out and found, tucked beneath the velvet lining, a folded note. Elena, if you find this, I'm sorry. I tried to be brave. Please don't forget me. It wasn't Anna's handwriting. It was their mother's. Elena sank to the bed, hands trembling. She knew she whispered. She knew something had happened to Anna, but she never said anything. She blamed herself. Jake crouched beside her. Sometimes grief makes people silent. She spent the rest of her life trying to make it go away, Elena said, cleaning the walls, replacing the furniture, as if erasing it would make it untrue. Jake placed a hand gently over hers. You didn't forget, and neither did Anna. Elena's voice cracked. I left her here. No, Jake said firmly. You were 12. You did everything you could. Her eyes filled. But it wasn't enough. Jake didn't speak. He just stayed beside her, steady, grounding her like a pillar in a storm. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the purple bracelet. It still glinted faintly in the dusty light. She placed it gently on the pillow. Welcome home, little star, she said. Back at Jake's house, Lily waited on the porch. She sat cross-legged, a small flower in her hand. When she saw Elena return, she stood up and ran into her arms without hesitation. Elena knelt and held her tightly. She's not there anymore, Lily said into her shoulder. She's gone. Elena pulled back. Where did she go? Lily touched her chest. Somewhere peaceful. Elena nodded, tears streaming freely now. Good. She deserves that. Jake watched them from the steps, a warmth blooming in his chest. Not joy exactly, but something gentler, something like healing. That evening, Jake brought out an old photo album. The three of them sat on the living room floor as he flipped through pages of sun-faded images, his wedding day, his garage, in the early years his wife holding a sparkler under the 4th of July sky. Lily pointed to one photo, Jake and his wife, side by side, covered in grease and laughing. She looked kind, she said. She was, Jake replied. The best thing that ever happened to me. Elena leaned in. What was her name? Marissa. Do you think she'd be proud of you? Jake smiled faintly. She used to say I had a habit of fixing broken things. I think she'd like that. I haven't stopped. He turned to Lily. You know we never found your real last name. Lily shrugged. Doesn't matter. It might one day. She paused, then asked, Can I choose one? Jake and Elena exchanged a glance. Jake said, "Of course." Lily thought for a long moment. Then, softly, "Lawson. Like Jake Lawson." Elena chuckled. "I like that." Jake blinked. "You sure?" She nodded. "It feels safe." Jake reached over and pulled her close. "Then it's yours." That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Elena stepped out onto the porch where Jake stood with a mug of coffee watching the stars. She called herself Lawson, Elena said. Just like that. Jake sipped, smiled. Didn't even ask for permission. She doesn't need it. She chose us. Elena leaned against the railing beside him. "It's strange," she said. "I came back here to solve a mystery. But I think what I really needed was to remember I still had something to give." Jake looked at her, the porch light catching in her hair, softening the grief that had once etched every line of her face. "You gave Anna a resting place. You gave Lily a future. You gave me a reason to breathe again." Their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. And in that quiet, nothing more needed to be said. It began with a phone call. Elena stood in the kitchen phone pressed to her ear, her expression darkening with every passing second. Jake could see her from the living room where he sat beside Lily, helping her sound out words from a weathered storybook. He knew that look he'd seen it on firefighters who'd just pulled someone from wreckage. Controlled panic. Focus sharpened by fear. She hung up without speaking and turned to Jake. "They're reopening the investigation," she said, voice tight. Jake stood. Reopening. The sheriff filed a report about the remains, the symbol, the diary. State investigators are coming down this week, and Langley, or George Lane, whatever name he goes by, now he's under quiet surveillance. Jake exhaled. "It's finally happening." Elena nodded, but her jaw clenched. Not everyone's happy. They learned just how unhappy some people were when Jake went into town later that afternoon. He only wanted to pick up brake pads. But as he walked into the hardware store, the air turned heavy. A couple of men near the counter fell silent. Mrs. Kruger, the shopkeeper, barely met his eyes. "You gonna stir up old ghosts again, Jake?" one of the men muttered. Jake turned calm but firm. "I'm not stirring anything, just helping set the record straight." The man crossed his arms. "You ever think there's a reason people wanted that record buried?" Jake stared at him. "Yeah, because someone didn't want a little girl's body found behind a barn wall." The man flinched, then looked away. No one else said a word as Jake paid and left. Back at home, Jake recounted the moment to Elena, who wasn't surprised. "This town was never built on truth," she said. "It was built on looking the other way." Lily, sitting quietly at the table, looked up, but not everyone did. Jake smiled. "No, not everyone." Lily's voice was soft but certain. She remembers who looked for her. Elena turned to her. "Do you remember anything new?" Lily frowned, then reached for her sketch pad. She drew slowly, carefully. When she turned the page around, both Jake and Elena felt the air shift. It was a drawing of a basement, narrow, dark, with a staircase leading down. And in the corner, a box. Inside the box, files, paperwork, photographs. "What is this?" Lily Elena asked, her voice almost a whisper. "It's where he kept them," Lily said. "The things he took, things no one ever found." Jake leaned closer. "Where?" She tapped the upper corner of the page. There was a sign, a familiar name scrawled above the doorframe in blocky letters. County Records Storage West Annex. Elena gasped. That building was condemned years ago. Jake was already grabbing his coat. The West Annex sat behind the county clerk's office, long forgotten. It had been shuttered in the mid-90s after asbestos was found in the insulation, and no one ever got around to demolishing it. Jake and Elena parked behind it, careful to stay out of view. The side door was chained, but the padlock was rusted through. Jake broke it off with a crowbar. They stepped into darkness, flashlights sweeping over peeling paint, broken furniture, and mildew-stained boxes. They followed Lily's sketch like a treasure map. Down a hallway, past the stairs, into the far corner where an old supply room had been walled off. Jake tested the door. locked. Elena stepped back, aimed her flashlight, and noticed something odd, a seam in the drywall that didn't match the blueprints she'd reviewed last year. She pressed on the edge. A panel shifted. Behind it, a staircase just like Lily had drawn. They descended slowly, the air thick and stale. At the bottom, in a small concrete room, was a single metal cabinet. Jake opened it. Inside were files, dozens of them, each one labeled with a name and a photograph. All children, all dated between 1979 and 1990. Elena pulled one at random. A girl with dark braids and bright eyes. "Her name's not in any missing persons database," she whispered. Jake flipped through more. Some had attached documents, letters denying home visits, rejections of inquiries, closed case stamps signed by none other than George Langley. Jake's voice was low. "This isn't just about Anna." Elena nodded, trembling. He didn't just silence her. He erased others too. By the time they returned home, the sun had dipped low behind the trees. Lily sat on the porch, waiting, her sketchpad hugged to her chest. Jake knelt beside her. "You helped us find them." She looked up. "Will they be remembered?" Now Jake's voice caught. "They will." Elena sat beside them. "You gave them back their names." Lily whispered, "I don't know my real name." Elena touched her shoulder. "Then maybe it's time you choose." Lily thought for a moment, then said, "Anna called me Lily in her dreams." "Then Lily is who you are," Jake said, "and that's who you'll be." That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She walked out into the yard, barefoot, moonlight dusting the grass in silver. Jake followed moments later, a blanket slung over his arm. He wrapped it around her without a word. They stood there, looking up at the stars. "I keep thinking," she said, "about all the parents who never got answers, all the children who were forgotten." Jake placed a hand over hers. "But they're not forgotten anymore." And Lily Elena asked, "What kind of life can she have now?" Jake looked back toward the house where the soft glow of a nightlight spilled through Lily's window. "The kind she chooses," he said. Then he turned to Elena. "And maybe, so can we." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting every sleepless year, every question that never got asked until now. "Yes," she said softly. "Maybe we all can." The name Lily Anna Lawson was printed neatly in black ink across the top of the form, just beneath the words, "Emergency Foster Custody Application Expedited Review." Jake held the paper in his hand, the pen poised above the signature line. He wasn't a man who hesitated often. He fixed things, got them done. But this was something else. He looked up from the paper across the kitchen table. Lily sat beside Elena, her feet swinging beneath the chair, her braid half undone. She clutched a stuffed bear Elena had found in an old donation box. Its button eye was loose, its ear frayed, but Lily adored it like it was gold. "You don't have to do this," Elena said gently. Jake looked at her. "Don't I?" She held his gaze. "You already saved her. You gave her a home. You don't need a form to prove anything." Jake shook his head. "It's not about proof. It's about giving her something no one's ever given her a choice. Stability. A name that means something because someone fought to give it to her." He turned to Lily. "Is that still the name you want?" She nodded, eyes shining. "Lily Anna Lawson." Jake pressed the pen to the paper and signed. The next morning, they drove to the courthouse. It was an old stone building with ivy creeping up the columns and an American flag flapping quietly in the wind. Elena had arranged the hearing through a friend at the county office. Thanks to the media coverage on the reopened Marsh case and the discovery of the files in the West Annex, the judge had agreed to fast-track the request. The waiting room smelled like paper and lemon floor polish. Jake adjusted the collar of his best flannel shirt while Elena filled out final forms. Lily sat between them, holding Jake's hand like it was something ancient and sacred. A clerk opened the door and called their names. Inside the courtroom was small and spare. A single wooden bench, a modest bench where the judge sat in quiet dignity. No jury, no gallery, Just the three of them and the law. Judge Fenton was older than the building, his eyebrows thick and white as snow. He read through the documents, pausing once at the name on the top line. "Lily Anna Lawson," he said aloud. "That's a good strong name." Lily smiled shyly. The judge looked over his glasses. "Is that the name you chose, young lady?" She nodded. "And are you choosing Mr. Jake Lawson to be your legal guardian?" Another nod. Judge Fenton turned to Jake. "Sir, do you understand the responsibility you're undertaking?" Jake cleared his throat. "I do. Have you had any prior experience with foster care?" Jake hesitated, then said, "No, but I've had experience with loss, with rebuilding, with learning to listen, and I think that might be enough." The judge looked at him for a long moment, then turned to Elena. "And you're listed as a secondary guardian and community advocate." "Yes, Your Honor," she replied. "I've known this child since the day she arrived in our town. She saved us as much as we saved her." Judge Fenton sat back thoughtful. Then he smiled. "Well," he said, "I've read a lot of files, seen a lot of names. Some, I remember, some, I don't. But this one feels like it'll stick." He picked up his pen. "In the eyes of the state of Colorado, Lily Anna Lawson, your application is approved." Jake let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Lily's grip on his hand tightened. Then she looked at Elena and whispered, "Can we go home now?" That night, Jake sat in the living room, feet up, beer untouched beside him, the paper with the judge's signature framed and resting on the mantel. Elena stood nearby, quietly sifting through the mail. Lily was in the kitchen humming to herself as she colored. A quiet content tune different from the ones that used to haunt her. There was no weight in her voice now, only light. Elena finally broke the silence. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if she hadn't found you that morning?" Jake nodded. "Every day. I used to believe the worst things that happen to us are random," she said. "But now, I'm not so sure." Jake looked up. "I think sometimes," she continued, "tragedy doesn't end us. It redirects us toward the things we're supposed to find." He stood and crossed the room to her. "And what do you think we were supposed to find?" he asked. She met his eyes. Each other. Jake didn't move, didn't speak, but something shifted in the air between them. The kind of quiet that asked for more but didn't demand it. He took her hand, and she didn't pull away. Later that night, when the house was dark and the world felt still again, Lily stood at her window watching the stars. Jake walked in, tucking her blanket around her shoulders. "You all right?" She nodded. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Of course." "I still remember parts of Anna's dreams," she said. "Sometimes they come like pictures, sometimes just feelings." Jake sat beside her. "Does it scare you?" "Not anymore," she said. "Not since we found her." Jake placed a hand on her shoulder. "You gave her peace. She gave me family." They sat in silence for a long while, watching the moon rise slow and silver over the trees. Eventually, Lily turned toward Jake, her voice sleepy and soft. "Will you be here tomorrow?" Jake kissed the top of her head. "I'll be here every tomorrow I can give." And in that moment, for the first time since Anna vanished, for the first time since Jake lost his wife, for the first time since Lily opened her eyes to a world she didn't belong to, they were no longer broken. They were whole. The for-lease sign on Main Street had been fading in the window for over 3 years, but Jake saw it differently now. Where others saw a cracked window pane and an outdated electrical box, he saw space, purpose, possibility. He turned the key in the door. It groaned open like the beginning of a new chapter. Elena stepped in beside him, brushing dust from the countertop. Hard to believe this used to be Wilson's barber shop. Jake chuckled, and before that, a bakery, and a hardware store before that. And now. He looked around, the empty space wide and bright despite the grime, the sunlight slicing in through warped blinds. "Now it's going to be both a garage and a cafe," he said. "A place for people to wait while I fix their cars." Or their stories. Elena arched a brow. Fixing stories. Jake smiled. It's what we do now, isn't it? She walked to the back wall where Lily had already started taping up hand-drawn sketches, blueprints for counter-doodles of coffee cups with smiley faces, even a sign, mock-up second-chance garage and cafe. Lily stood beside her, a pencil tucked behind her ear, smudges of graphite on her fingertips. "Do you think people will come?" she asked. Jake nodded. "They'll come for the coffee. They'll stay for the quiet." Elena added, "And maybe for the stories, too." They worked for weeks. Jake handled the repairs, ripping out old pipes, sanding floors, fixing outlets. Elena filed the permits and wrote the community grant proposal. And Lily she drew. Murals. Dozens of them. Across one wall, a painting of a girl swinging from a tree with sunlight falling through leaves. On another, a mechanic bent over a truck, a child watching nearby. In a corner booth space, a girl with a notebook in her lap and a sky full of stars overhead. "I want them to feel safe when they walk in," Lily said. Jake knelt beside her one afternoon while she painted, watching the way she blended color with care, far beyond her years. "You've been through more than most people ever will," he said, "and you still choose color." Lily didn't stop painting. That's what Anna would have wanted. The soft opening happened on a Thursday. Nothing fancy, no press, no ribbon cutting, just a couple of folding chairs out front, a chalkboard sign offering free coffee for first-time visitors, and the door propped open with a brick. Jake brewed the coffee. Elena handled the register. Lily offered hand-drawn menus with doodles on the corners, heart sunbursts, a tiny wrench. The first customer was Mrs. Kruger from the hardware store. She stepped inside, cautiously, eyes scanning the walls. Jake braced himself for skepticism, but instead she smiled faintly. "I knew your wife," she said. "She'd like what you're doing here." Jake's voice was rough. "Thank you." The second customer was a teenage boy with oil-streaked hands who'd heard about the free tune-ups Jake was offering for kids working their way through trade school. And by mid-afternoon, the place had filled with a gentle hum, quiet conversation clinks of ceramic mugs, the creak of chairs shifting. It wasn't just a business, it was a beacon. That evening, after the last customer had gone, they sat in the back on folding chairs surrounded by the faint scent of cinnamon and grease. Jake, Elena, and Lily. Lily rested her head on Jake's shoulder. "Do you think Anna knows?" she asked. Jake looked at Elena. "She knows," Elena said softly. "She's here," Jake added. Lily smiled. "In the paint, in the songs I hum, in the stars." Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, worn, smooth, familiar. Anna's bracelet. He handed it to Lily. She cradled it like a treasure. "I want to keep it here," she said. "Not in a box, where people can see it." Jake nodded. "Put it wherever you think she'd like." Lily stood and walked to the front window. There, beneath her mural of the tree swing, she placed the bracelet on a small ledge. Above it, she hung a handwritten plaque for Anna. "You were never forgotten. You brought us home." Elena pressed her hand to her mouth. Tears gathered, but she let them come. Jake put an arm around her shoulder. "This," she whispered, "this is what we were meant to build." "Not just for her," Jake said. "For every child who didn't get a second chance. And every adult who thought it was too late," Elena added. As night settled in, Lily sat outside with a mug of warm milk, her legs tucked beneath her, wrapped in an oversized hoodie. She stared up at the sky, watching the stars blink to life one by one. Jake joined her. He didn't speak, just sat. She reached over and took his hand. "I think I know what my real last name was," she said softly. "Before Lawson." Jake glanced at her. She looked up. "But I don't want it." Jake squeezed her fingers gently. "Then you never have to go back." She nodded. "Because everything I need is forward." He smiled. "That's where we're going." From inside, the mural glowed faintly in the low light. A girl on a swing. A tree full of wind. A house with light in the windows. A bracelet in the open, never buried again. 1 year later. Willow Ridge had changed in ways no one could have predicted. Not in the grand, sweeping gestures that newspapers write about, but in the quiet kind of way that lives on back porches and in the soft glances shared across small-town streets. The Second Chance Garage and Cafe had become more than just a business. It had become a rhythm, a place where people brought more than busted engines and empty coffee cups. They brought stories, grief, questions that had waited too long for answers. Jake stood at the counter polishing a coffee pot that didn't really need polishing just to keep his hands moving. The late autumn sun spilled through the front windows, casting long golden lines across the wooden floor and dancing in the steam rising from the espresso machine. Elena entered through the side door carrying a box of fresh flyers for the fundraiser they'd host next week, a benefit for missing children in Anna's name. She looked at him over the rim of her coffee. "You thinkin' again?" Jake smiled, always. She joined him behind the counter. "Where's Lily?" "She's with Marisol," he said. "They're painting the new wall in the reading corner." "Another mural." Jake nodded. "This one's her idea, a garden where every flower has someone's name." Elena's smile softened. "She's grown so much." "She has." He didn't just mean physically. He meant the way her voice no longer trembled when she read aloud, the way her shoulders didn't flinch when someone new entered the cafe, the way she laughed, really laughed like it wasn't borrowed from someone else's dream anymore. She was Lily, fully and truly, and she was home. Later that afternoon, as the cafe filled with the hum of community, a couple of retired teachers playing cards in the corner, two teens working on homework, a local mechanic tuning a guitar between lattes. Jake stepped outside to check on Lily. She knelt in the garden space, her hands covered in blue and gold paint, her hair pulled into a messy ponytail. A small plaque had been placed in the soil beside the newest flower bed, in memory of those we never forgot. Jake approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "Need help?" Lily shook her head. "I'm almost done." She looked up at him, her face bright with sun and joy. "We're planting memory seeds today." Jake crouched beside her. Memory seeds. For people who never had names. Each flower means someone mattered, even if we don't know their whole story. Jake looked at the brushstrokes she'd painted on the garden sign. Petals of every color swirling in around a center mark, the same one she used to draw over and over in the dirt. He touched the edge of the sign. "That symbol." Lily nodded. "It's not a warning anymore. It's a beginning." Jake's throat tightened. "You remember what it used to mean?" "I remember what it felt like," she said. "Fear, hiding, trying to be heard. And now," she smiled, "now it means seen." That evening, as the sky turned a tender pink and the lights in the cafe glowed like a row of fireflies, they held a gathering. It wasn't fancy. Just neighbors, friends, and familiar faces from the town's edges. They sipped cider, listened to Lily read a short poem she'd written about stars and gardens and the power of a name, and stood in reverent silence as Jake lit a single lantern and released it into the sky. Elena joined him as it floated upward, her hand slipping into his. "I think Anna would have liked this," she whispered. Jake nodded. "I think she does." Lily ran to them, then cheeks flushed, eyes bright. "Come on," she said. "We have to light the wall." They followed her to the mural that now stretched across the cafe's inner hallway, a tapestry of faces, names, dates, and symbols. Jake flipped the switch. Tiny lights embedded in the frame flickered on, illuminating the mural like stained glass. At the center, one image stood out. A girl on a swing. Hair flying, eyes wide, drawn in vibrant lines. Above her, hand-painted in Lily's careful lettering, the second mark, a place for stories that found their ending. When the last guests had gone and the music faded to the hush of crickets beyond the porch, Jake stood outside with Elena, arms wrapped around each other as Lily curled asleep in a chair just behind the screen door. The stars were sharp and clear. Jake took a deep breath. "You know what? I never told you." Elena looked up. "What?" "The morning she showed up Lily, I was thinking of selling the garage, closing it down." Elena blinked. Why didn't you? Jake looked through the window at Lily, peaceful in the glow of the mural lights. Because something told me. She was the one thing in my life I wasn't supposed to fix. I was just supposed to protect her until she could fix herself. Elena rested her head against his chest, and she did. He nodded, and she fixed us too. Inside, the mural glowed steady. Outside, the town exhaled gently into the coming winter. And in the quiet house behind the cafe that once was only a place of work and now was a place of healing, 3 lives rested beneath one roof, no longer broken, no longer searching. A child who had no name, a woman who had lost her sister, and a man who had thought his story was over. Together they had built something not out of perfection, but out of love, out of truth. And when the wind moved just right through the town, if you stood still enough, you could almost hear the swing creak gently. And a girl's laughter bright and free, echoing from a time no longer lost. Where in the world are you listening from? We'd love to know. Drop your city or country in the comments below. It means the world to us to see how far these stories reach. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next one. Every week we share tales of love healing and the quiet strength that changes lives. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep believing in the power of stories.